Well, it's awfully quiet today. It's awfully sparse today. I say awfully well, but we know why. The Gumperts are gone, but glad to be all here. We'll try to continue on. If we don't finish today, we'll finish next week on the book of John, beginning in chapter 21 today. And as we've looked at last week, Jesus showing himself to the disciples, and they verified for themselves that he was really Jesus because of the wounds in his hands, the wound in his side. And then John makes a statement of why he wrote the account altogether in verse 30 and 31 of chapter 20. He says, many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written, that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, Son of God, and that believing you might have life through his name. That would close the book up nicely, wouldn't it? The summation of everything was right there. Just as Solomon summed up all his research in the Ecclesiastes in the final verses of chapter 13. 13, 12. What does God really expect of us? What's required of us? Chapter 12, verse 13. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Okay. And the reasoning is, for God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. He summed up everything right there in 2 verses. Of course, he didn't have the verses in those days. The verse numbers were added later. I think it was by Jerome. And it makes it very quick for us to find these verses. But in the last 2 sentences of his book, he finishes everything up. And so as we see here in John 20, 2 verses, it actually is 1 sentence, that John summarizes the whole purpose of the book, and that having delivered this evidence, the desire is that you believe, and in your belief find everlasting life. Now we understand that believing involves more than just a mental assent, an educated intellectual assessment that yes, I believe that Jesus is the Son of God. It's more than that, because the facts that are to be believed call for an action, a command to be obeyed, an action to be done because of the facts of Jesus dying on the cross, because of Jesus being the Son of God. Therefore, what must we do? Because there's something that he didn't just do this for his health. He didn't just do this because he got bored in heaven. He did this because he loved us. Okay, and so because of that, there's something that is required of us. So in our believing, we might have life through his name. So believing involves much more than just, I believe that Jesus is the Son of God. It's everything. It's what our life comes down to. A change of our behavior. Because Jesus is the Son of God, because he died on the cross, he calls us to obedience. Okay. All right, so after these things, in verse 1, Jesus showed himself again to disciples at the Sea of Tiberias, and on this wise showed he himself. So he showed himself on the Sea of Tiberias, and this is how he did it. Okay, so you look at Tiberias, that's the northern lake where Capernaum was. It's also time called the Sea of Tiberias. Yeah, well, the Sea of Tiberias, the Sea of Chinneroth, an Old Testament reference to it. But Capernaum was on the shores of the Sea of Tiberias. That's where Jesus, his headquarters, if you will, where he worked out in his mission upon the earth. Okay, so that's where they were, and this is how he did it. There were together Simon Peter and Thomas called Didymus, and Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other of his disciples. So they all weren't there, but several of them were. And so Simon Peter said to them, I go a-fishing. They said to him, we also go with thee. They went forth and entered into a ship immediately, and that night they caught nothing. Now, was there anything wrong with Now, when he says they're going fishing, it's not, I'm going to get my hook and my bait, go sit on the shoreline and just ponder. No, that wasn't what he meant. They didn't fish like that in those days, did they? When they fished, it was commercial fishing. And so just as they were fishermen before Jesus called them, So there they were. What are they going to do? Of course, Jesus is meeting them, and he's preparing them, and he'll give them commandments. We see in Luke 1, the commands that they were given to remain in Jerusalem. But as they were waiting, living, and so what do they do? Well, I'm going to go fishing. I'm going to go. Maybe their funds were running out, and this was commercial enterprise, so they could make money from. But regardless, it was not something that's condemned of them that they were forsaking the Lord and they're doing these things. But rather, this perhaps may have been a necessity. So they said, I'm going to go fishing. And they said, okay, let's go. And so when they went, they had caught nothing. This was not unusual, not to catch anything. That's just part of the nature of the fishing, commercial fishing. Of that. When they go fishing, sometimes you don't catch anything. And so it says they didn't catch anything. But when the morning was now come, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples knew not that it was Jesus. Then Jesus said to them, Children, have ye any meat? They answered him, No. It was not necessarily questions, I'm hungry, do you have something for me to eat? But rather, did you catch anything? Okay. And if they caught something, maybe he'd be able to buy it. Okay. So it's just a conversation. And he appeared to them, and as he addressed them, children, this is just a common greeting, and that a stranger would make with you. So he didn't say anything in a way that would indicate who he was, the relationship they had to them. So he just said, hey guys, have any meat? I said, that's just it says they answered him no, because they hadn't caught anything that night. He said to them, cast the net on the right side of the ship, and ye shall find. They cast it forward, and now they were not able to draw it for the multitude of the fishes. So all of a sudden, not having caught anything all night, says, just cast on the other side. Why? Why not? So they went ahead and cast it, and they couldn't pull it in. They couldn't pull the fishes in because it was so many. Therefore that disciple whom Jesus loved saith unto Peter, this is John, it is the Lord. Now when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he girt his fisher's coat unto him, for he was naked, and did cast himself into the sea. That's an interesting choice of words, isn't it? So they were out there fishing, and they were geared up. They were dressed appropriate for the labor that was at hand. Okay, and so his fisher's coat he had taken off to do the work. But now, as it says, when John said, "Hey, it's the Lord," Peter realizes, so he puts on his coat, for he was naked. It's very interesting that it would refer to him his status like that. And what was his concern? He wanted to be properly dressed. It's very interesting that so many in our culture today make a big deal out of the kind of clothes they're supposed to wear. They're saying, well, I don't see anything wrong with it, and things like that. But when they see the attitude of Peter, and when you realize his respect of the Christ, respect of Jesus was great, that he put on the appropriate clothing to go see him. And so it's a different perspective between how Peter sees the situation and how others in our culture say, well, what's wrong with this or what's wrong with that? Not thinking about it might be very well inappropriate for various reasons. Okay. That's a discussion for another time, but I think it's very interesting how he himself, although he did have clothes on that they would fish in, but yet it refers to him as being naked, therefore he put on his cloak or his fisher's coat. Okay. And the other disciples came in a little ship, for they were not far from the land, but as it were 200 cubits, dragging the net with fishes. So they called in all the other guys around to help drag in these fishes. As soon as they were come to the land, they saw a fire of coals there, and fish laid thereon. So it's not indicated how much time it took to draw these fish in, how long it was between when the other disciples had their little ship that came up beside them to help drag in the nets to bring in the fish. But as it was, when they came to the land, they saw the fire of coals there, and the fish laid thereon. So Jesus had his own fish too, and bread. And Jesus said to them, bring of the fish which ye have now caught. Says, come on over, we'll cook some more, I guess. I mean, Bring what you got. We'll cook some more. Okay, and Simon Peter went up and drew the net to land full of great fishes, 153. And for all there were so many, yet was not the net broken. Now, so of all the fish, obviously there'd be other fishes, but they counted the big fish, the great ones, and they said there's like 153. And for all the draw that they had, it didn't break the nets. So things are adding up. This guy did you make a catch today? Says, no, we'll throw over on that side of the boat. And so they did. And they got so much, they can't draw the nets. And when they got help, when they did draw the nets, it was so much, but yet the nets weren't rended. Okay, they were still intact. So let's start putting things together. Who is this guy? In verse 12, Jesus said unto them, come and dine. And none of the disciples durst ask him, who art thou? Knowing that it was the Lord. So I say, who is this guy? They knew from all the evidence there. Okay, so Jesus then cometh and taketh bread, giveth them, and fish likewise. This is now the third time that Jesus showed himself to his disciples after he was risen from the dead. So far we've seen, the first time he appeared to them was the night of his resurrection. He just appeared to them while they're in the closed building. Okay. The second time was a week later when Thomas was with them. And that was also in the same situation where they had all the doors closed as they were meeting on the first day of the week. And Jesus appeared to them once again. The implication is that he appeared to them miraculously. He didn't have to open the doors and walk in. He was just there. And this is now the third time that John refers to, makes note that he had appeared to them. So, when they had dined, Jesus saith to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me more than these? He saith unto him, Yea, Lord, thou knowest that I love thee. He saith unto him, Feed my lambs. Now, you may have heard this already, but I'm going to say it anyway. When Jesus asked him, he asked him, do you agape me? Do you love me in a way that is the way that God loves us? You know, you're familiar with there are 4 different ways where we have one word representing love. The Greek language has 4 different words for different kinds of love. The term that's not in the Bible, in the New Testament, is that of eros. It's the word we get erotic from. It's a kind of physical attraction that people have between a man and a woman. That God has authorized that kind of love within marriage. And then there's phileo, storge, and agape. Storge is a familial love. But phileo is like a brotherly love. It's more designed around feelings. I say designed around. It's more expressive of the warm feelings we'd have, the strong feelings we have for others. And then there's the agape love, which has nothing to do with our feelings about people or things, has everything to do with our concern for them. And as we think about, well, how can you love someone without feelings for them? Well, we're commanded to love one another. Are we commanded to have warm feelings for everybody? No, our feelings are that's what God does not command us to do, is just have feelings for other people. God commands us to be concerned, to do those things that are for their benefit and their welfare. That's the kind of love he's talking about. Look at James when he talks about the faith that saves. It's an extension of love that has nothing to do with the situation or how you might feel about somebody, but something that needs to be done, taken care of. As God loves us, not that he did all things that are for our benefit, even though we were his enemies, he still sacrificed his son. Even though while we were yet sinners, Christ died for the ungodly. And so when Jesus asked Peter, do you agape me? Peter said, you know I phileo you. You know I love you like a brother. You know, you've heard of the Philadelphia, right? That's the city of brotherly love, if you can believe that. That's the name. That's what the name means. And so Jesus asked, do you agape me? He said, you know I love you like a brother. Phileo. He said, feed my lambs. Now, with the background, remember that it was Peter who was so zealous for the Lord that he said, "I'll die with you tonight," back on that night of his betrayal. And Jesus said, "Yeah, you will. But I'll tell you what, something you don't know, you're going to deny me 3 times before the cock crows, before the night is out, before the morning is out, morning comes, you're going to deny me 3 times." And he did. And you remember he went and he wept bitterly because he realized what he had done. When somebody relies upon you, when somebody trusts you, and you do something rather purposely or accidentally that seems to betray a trust that you have between them, how hard that is how bitter you might feel about that. How did I let myself do this? And so as Peter had wept bitterly, he realized that it seems to me that he felt that way. He had betrayed him, and it hurt him so much, like a trust was betrayed. And so now Jesus is asking him, "Do you agape?" He says, "No, I love you like a brother. Okay, I have warm feelings for you." And as I read this, knowing that agape love is superior than the other forms of love because it transcends our feelings, and we know how feelings are. You don't know. I mean, they come and they go, and they might be there, they might not be. But agape is always there. But nevertheless, I think that Peter was saying, I don't just love you intellectually. I love you like my brother. I have warm feelings for you, and so he wasn't just saying, "Yeah, I love you." He's saying, "I love you." And he says, "Feed my lambs." So now he's calling Peter back, say, "Look, take care of who? Who are Jesus' lambs?" His followers. He saith unto him again the second time, "Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me?" Now note, it's very interesting that would Peter, go way back to Matthew chapter 16 when Jesus says, "Who do you say that I am? I, the Son of Man, am." Peter perked up and says, "Thou art the Son of God. You're the Christ, the Son of God." It said, "Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah." He used his given name. Simon Bar-Jonah was his given name. "For flesh and blood is not revealed unto me," he says. "I tell you," "that thou art Peter," or Petra, a small stone. "And upon this rock, this bedrock, that is the confession he just made, the fact that he's the Christ, the Son of God, I will build my church." But at that point, he called Simon by a nickname, you might say, Peter. The rock. Peter was the rock. But now, Peter, having bruised their relationship in denying Christ, betraying a trust, the relationship wasn't the same at this point, and Peter knew it. And so Jesus was saying, "Simon Peter," he says, "Simon," not Peter, but Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me? He says, "Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me?" He says, he saith unto him, "Yea, Lord, thou knowest that I love thee." Once again, with that phileo love. Jesus asking, "Do you agape me?" Peter saying, "You know I love you like a brother." He said to him, "Feed my sheep." Once again, he's calling Peter. He's calling him back. He's calling him back, not willing that he should go off, lose his soul, and such a powerful asset to the Lord's church. And he saith unto him the third time, "Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me?" Now this, if I recall correct, this was phileo. Jesus asked him, "Do you love me like a brother?" Peter was grieved because he said unto him the third time, "Lovest thou me?" And he said unto him, "Lord, thou knowest all things. Thou knowest all things." Going back once again to the night that he denied Jesus. Jesus had told them, Peter said, "I'll die with you tonight." Jesus said, "You're going to deny me 3 times. What do you think, how incredulous do you think Peter was? I don't believe I'm going to deny you. No way, I'm ready to die for you. So I think he was convinced he was going to go all the way to death. And then after his denying him 3 times, hearing the cock crow, and looking and meeting Jesus' eyes, he realized, I was wrong, and I did you wrong, Jesus. I betrayed you. And he went out and wept bitterly, not knowing this about himself. Not knowing this about himself. You know that how we will respond in an emergency, we really don't know absolutely unless we're confronted with that emergency. We learn, we train, we go through all the, and we prepare ourselves mentally, but we really don't know until we're there. But Jesus knew what was in Peter, and Jesus knew what was going to happen when Peter was confronted. And then as Peter is telling him now, Peter was grieved because third time loves on me. He says, and he said unto him, Lord, thou knowest all things. Yes, he does. How confident could Peter be in his resolve? How confident could he be of how he will? Is he? What's the word I'm looking for? Is he a stand-up kind of guy? The guy that'll stand the gap. And so he was somewhat humbled at this point. He says, "You know all things. Thou knowest all things. Thou knowest that I love thee, Jesus. Thou knowest that I love thee." Okay, so as Jesus knew that Peter would deny him, and Peter has said twice already he loves Jesus, Jesus saith unto him, "Feed my sheep." And I don't know of the significance, but it's a rather interesting note. You've probably heard this too. As Jesus denied Christ 3 times, Jesus gave Peter 3 times to confess his love for him. And each time he said, "Feed my lambs, feed my sheep, feed my sheep." And now he enters into a different part of the conversation. As he's calling Jesus, he's not giving him a pie in the sky idea about what's before him. You know, when Peter was convinced, he was determined to even die for Christ that night. Jesus knew that he would betray him, but he also knew what was before him about the baptism that he would face, as it were, that of death, basically. So in verse 18, we said, "Verily, verily, I say unto thee, when thou wast young, thou girdest thyself, and walkest whither thou wouldest." So when we're young, we're strong enough so we can dress ourselves, and we go where we want to, right? When we're young, we have that strength, and we have our self-will, and walkest whither thou wouldest. But when thou shalt be old, what happens when we get old? Thou shalt stretch forth thy hands, and another shall gird thee, and carry thee whither thou wouldest not. So when we get old and we can't dress ourselves, other people taking care of us, dressing us, and they take us not where we want to go necessarily, but where they take us. And so Jesus is saying, okay, you're going to grow old, but and you'll be taken where you don't want to be. Well, let's go to the next verse. "This spake he, signifying by what death he should glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he saith unto him, Follow me." I didn't mean to imply that he would be Peter die in old age. That's not what I mean. But rather, his death would be like as if he were old, where they would take him where he didn't want to go. Now we know he was taken into custody. And we know that he was executed. In fact, as tradition holds, I don't know how much, it's not by inspiration, but rather historic record, perhaps. I don't know. It was said that they were going to crucify him, but because of his reverence and respect for Jesus, for the Lord, he requested that he be crucified upside down, thinking that he was not worthy of being crucified like the Lord was. So they did. They crucified him upside down. And as it was, so Jesus was telling Peter, this is how you're going to die. And it was, we know he was taken into captivity, and he was taken to be executed. And so that was the death that would glorify God. That's what John was talking about. "This spake he, signifying by what death he should glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he saith unto him, follow me. Think about this, what he just said. He gave Peter 3 times opportunities to confess his love for Christ, and he did so. And each time he said, feed my sheep. He's calling Peter to continue on in the kingdom. And then he goes on to say, this is how you're going to die. This is what following me is going to entail for your life. Okay? That you're going to be led around. You're not going to be able to go where you want. You're going to be in captivity, and you won't be free. And then he says, but follow me. He wasn't giving Peter the idea of the pie in the sky life, that everything would be hunky-dory, everything just wonderful. Right? He's telling him, you're going to face some hardships. It's going to end in your death, but follow me. Of course, we know that the glory, just as Paul in his service to the Lord, in his being taken captive and being executed for his faith, he was expecting a crown of righteousness. He was expecting the reward for his dedication, the reward for his hard work, and that he said, not just me only, but all those who love the coming of the Lord. Every Christian who has committed himself and lived a faithful life has that earnest hope, expectation, the reality there, that which they look forward to. And so Peter, in knowing his death that would come, it was still finer, better, more glorious, more better than anything else he could do, to continue following Christ and to die that death because of the glory that would come. Then Peter, turning about, seeth the disciple whom Jesus loved following, which also leaned on his breast at supper. He's talking about John again, and said, Lord, which is he that, and said, Lord, which is he that prayeth thee? So, speaking of John. And so Peter, looking back at John, and he says, Peter, seeing him, saith to Jesus, Lord, and what shall this man do? I used to think that this was that he said, what about him? Is he going to face what I'm going to face? I used to think that this was out of, look what you're giving me. What about him? You know, I know you guys have a great relationship together. What about him? Is he going to suffer what I'm going to suffer? So like out of not envy, but just, I don't know. I think it wasn't the greatest of feelings. But as I think about this now, it might have more to do with, remember that when Peter and John went running to the tomb and John outran him? John outran Peter. Why? Perhaps the age difference. He was more youthful, had more energy, more spry. So the indication was that John was younger than Peter. Peter may have had concern over John about his welfare and the things that, I can see that for me, that the death I'm going to face. But what about this young guy? What about him? Is he going to suffer like I've suffered? And Jesus saith unto him, if I will that he tarry till I come, what is that to thee? Follow thou me. Jesus told Peter what he was going to face with his life. And so Peter's asking about John. He said, don't worry about him. You worry about yourself. It's sort of like we don't have any idea of what our life is going to be as we follow the Savior. We don't have any idea where our life is going to end, where it's going to lead. I recall back to John chapter 3 when Jesus was talking. Was it 3? I guess it was not. He's talking about it's not in this chapter at all. There's a point at which Jesus was talking about I should have looked this up. He was talking about their Christian's life. It's like comparing it to the wind. You could see the leaves and the trees blow by the wind. You can see the effect of the wind. John 3? I was looking at that. I'm sorry, what? Yes. See, I don't see that. I'm looking through that. Yes, you're right. It is. It is John 3 after all. Okay. In verse 5, he's talking to Nicodemus, explaining about the new birth. He says, Jesus said, "Verily, verily, I say to thee, except a man be born of water and of the Spirit, he cannot enter into the kingdom of God. That which is born of the flesh is flesh, and that which is born of the Spirit is spirit." So there's a difference between the Spirit teaching. He says that he's teaching him spiritual things that affect the spiritual aspect of man and does not affect the physical, okay? And so whereas others might teach worldly things about how to make your life better, these teachings I'm giving you are spiritual, the new birth and everything, okay? That which is born of the flesh is flesh. That which is born of the Spirit is spirit. So as one is born of the Spirit by the teachings of the Holy Spirit, that's life, okay? "Marvel not that I said unto thee, ye must be born again." And this is what I'm talking about. "The wind bloweth where it listeth, and thou hearest the sound thereof, but canst not tell whence it cometh, and whither it goeth. So is every one that is born of the Spirit." You know, it's so sad that so many take this passage that they talk, this is how Spirit works. You don't know how it works in us. You know, as you obey the gospel, the Spirit comes into you, and it affects you, and you just don't understand where it came from. That's not what he's talking about. That's false. What he's saying here is that those who are born of the Spirit, who's that? Those who obey the gospel. If they're born of the Spirit, your faith is built, your belief and understanding of the gospel. And born of the water, you're baptized. He's saying, so is that one. You see, just like you see the wind blow, you don't see the wind blow. You see the effects of the wind blowing, but you don't see the wind blow. You see the trees, leaves wavering, but you don't see what causes it. You hear the sound, but you can't identify what's the source. You feel it on your skin, the wind blowing, but you can't see it. You say you can touch it. Well, you can't really touch it. But he says that's the way of the believer who has obeyed God. That's the way of the Christian. He goes and he comes, but you don't know where it's going to end up. And so it is as it is with Peter. He was told where he was going to end up, what his life would end. As we think about our lives, we don't know where we're going to end up. You know, and obviously, we know we're going to end in heaven, obviously. But this life on this earth, we don't know what it's in it for us. And so Jesus tells Peter, you mind your own business. I don't think he said it like that. But he says, you mind yourself. Don't worry about him. And what is it if I desire that he lives till I come? Now, he makes a statement in verse 23, and John does. Then went this saying abroad among the brethren, that disciple should not die. Yet Jesus said not unto him, he shall not die, but if I will that he tarry till I come, what is that to thee? So Jesus didn't say he's not going to die, he's going to live till I come, I return. Well, that's not what he said. He said, Peter, what is it to you if I desire that he does live? You pay attention to your life and follow me. And I'll take care of him. Okay. And so, interestingly enough, there are people that as they read this, that they think that Jesus said that John's going to live till Jesus comes. Okay. And that's not what he said at all. And so John was trying, even in those days, the saying went around that John wasn't going to die. But John clarified, no, that's not what he said. Okay. Verse 24, this is the disciple which testifies to these things and wrote these things, and we know that his testimony is true. So he's talking about himself in the third person. The one that Jesus talked about, that if he should stay till I come, what's that to you? They were talking about John, and the one that John is the one that's writing this right now. And he saw these things and wrote these things. And we know that his testimony is true. What he said was absolutely right. It wasn't a fabrication. This was the gospel truth, as one would put it in a manner of speaking. So John he identified himself, the one who saw all these things, heard all these things. He was there through it all. That's who wrote this book. And furthermore, we know what he says is absolutely right. Verse 25, and there are also many other things which Jesus did, the which if they should be written, every one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that should be written. Amen. We're familiar with figures of speech, right? And we use figures of speech all the time. And as John was using what's called hyperbole, exaggeration, we'd say. As he said, if I wrote everything that Jesus did while I was here, the books wouldn't even fit on this earth. They'd pile high to the moon and back. Well, they didn't know how far the moon was, but that's just a figure of speech that he said. So there are a lot more things that Jesus did, and if you can think that everywhere he went, everything. There were people always around him. There are times that he had to escape to be alone. Okay, and there were places he would go to be alone with the Father and be with his disciples alone, but he was busy all the time. We think the president works hard. Jesus worked and worked and worked. As John said, I suppose even the books couldn't hold everything he did. So there's just a few things. So the question then is, did John achieve his purpose in us? Do you believe everything John wrote? I hope so. Because in believing, we find everlasting life. Okay. That pretty much covers the book of John, which has been quite it's the shortest of the four gospel accounts. And I didn't just want to do a cursory. I want to do a reasonably good overview or study of John without going into too much detail. Some things did require some more detail, and I think that was appropriately done. But if there are any other questions you might have, some things that don't quite click, then please ask me, and we can discuss that. And of course, if I don't know the answer, I'll find the answer. But I appreciate the privilege of being able to teach this class and have you all in here. And I appreciate the comments, the questions, and everything like that. But are there any questions that you might have regarding today or what we've gone over the past? Okay, I appreciate the opportunity. And next week, we'll start a new study. We might do just a short study to carry us to the end of the quarter. So we can start fresh on the new quarter. But if you have any suggestions or thoughts, please see me, and I'll consider that. And if I can do it, I'll do it. I know the questions we asked about the study of the angels. What does the Bible teaches about the angels? What can we learn from that? The kind of teachings that are going around the world today, it might not be a bad study. Consider that some people even worship angels. But and of course, that would also extend to the nature of Satan himself. Satan himself being an angel. But anyway, and if there are other things that might be, or just mention it, and we'll see what we can do. Thanks very much. But we'll see you tonight.